Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low carb lifestyle.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Keto Geek. Today we have one of the most amazing paradoxes that I could find in the world of Twitter. And his Twitter feed is one of the most hilarious, fun, and really just unique. And his name is Shawn Baker. Shawn, how are you doing today?
Hey, Fahad, I'm doing very well, thank you.
So, Shawn, I'm terrible with introductions, and before we even started this podcast, I told you right away. So would you like to give a little bit of description of what you do and how did you get into the zero carb world?
Sure. So, just as a brief introduction, I'm a 50-year-old multi-sport world champion athlete who currently is on a zero carb diet. I'm also an orthopedic surgeon. I've been low carb to ketogenic for the last half decade or so. And for about the last 8 months, I've kind of pursued this zero carb diet and basically have noted some very positive effects with regard to both health as well as athletic performance. And so I'm at this point very curious by it. There are, thousands of people in these just different Facebook groups that pursue this. And I've noted almost with an anthropologic look, it's kind of studying those groups and seeing quite a bit of remarkable health improvements, at least being claimed. And so we're trying to sort of test that out a little bit more formally. We've started a little project called Nequalsmany.com. And one of the things we want to look at as our first project is this zero carb experience.
Sounds great. And you are an absolutely demonic athlete from what I've been seeing on your Twitter feed. I saw that one video in which you picked up this 135 pound barbell and you just tossed it up into the air like a little baby. So
that was a one-arm snatch with this 135. I used to compete in the Highland Games, and one of the events we used to throw a 56-pound weight one-handed over a bar, and so that's some of the stuff I used to train for. And I hadn't done that in several years, so I was just kind of playing around to see if I could still do that. And so it was just it was a pretty easy, just 135-pound one-arm snatch.
Wait, did you just say that's easy?
Well, it was relatively. I could probably have gone quite a bit heavier. That was all. I was just kind of messing around that day, and so that was. A lot of it is just being fast and it's hips and legs strength more than anything else. The one-arm stuff is more. It just looks kind of cool.
It was really awesome. We literally put that video on repeat at our Keto Geek when we were talking about it for 5 times, and we were just laughing that you could toss people up into the air. And so you've broken some world records. What's up with that?
I've been a competitive athlete my whole life. Going back several years, I was a power lifter, and I got up to a 350 kilo or 772 pound, drug-free deadlift, which was an American record in one of the organizations. And I'd done that for years. And so then I went into the Highland Games and I won the world championships for the over 40 group. And then I set a world record in that. And then I went on to this indoor rowing on a Concept 2. I just about 3 years ago, started doing that and started looking at some of the records. And they've been keeping records for the last 35 years or so. So it's a pretty, there's a pretty extensive database of records that they've been doing. It's pretty competitive. And I think most people that have done CrossFit or rowed competitively are very, very familiar with it. It's a pretty, it's a pretty challenging machine, and it's kind of nice because it's completely objective. There's no subjectivity to it. It's just you either do it or you don't. And so I've broken. Right now, I've got 3 current world records for the 50 plus class: 500 meter row, 1 minute row, 100 meter row. And then when I was in my 40s, still I broke some of the 40 plus world records, even though I was almost ready to turn 50. So I was still 10 years, almost about to age out of the class, but still able to set records. And so that's been pretty cool. And the interesting thing is since I've been on the zero carb diet, even though I was already at world record level, I've improved on that significantly since going on the diet, which has been as somebody who's been a lifelong athlete, to see that big of an improvement in that short period of time while changing diet is truly remarkable. And I think that's, I think there's some I've got some thought on why that occurs, but I mean, it's been pretty interesting. Right now, my 500 meter time, I am, right in there with the guys that are setting world records in the 20s and 30-year-old class. And so, despite being 20 years older, I'm still competing at a world-class level, from guys a couple decades earlier than me. And I think part of that, I've spent my life sort of training correctly, and I know what I'm doing largely through trial and error. But I think that diet has really, whether it's a ketogenic diet or now a zero carb diet, that has made a big impact on me staying healthy and being able to perform at a really high level.
And we are starting to see this pattern with a lot of other athletes as well in the world. Now, as we talked with our last podcast as well, with Tim Noakes leading the charge in certain ways. But in today's podcast, I would like to focus, at least at the start, about the zero carb diet. And since it's really just out of the box thinking, it's like, wait, we just cut out vegetables, fruits, all these things that, we were told to be part of our life. So what is a zero carb diet?
Well, first of all, a zero carb diet is not a zero carb diet. That's a misnomer. So there are a small amount of carbohydrates that you'll invariably take in. There are some. What it is basically is a plant-free diet. The goal is just to eat animal products, and the majority of it is just eating meat for the most part. If you look at things like eggs, each egg has about a half a gram of carbohydrate. Some meat has some residual carbohydrate. Depending which ones you get, if you eat organ meats like liver, you're going to get a little bit more carbohydrate. Some of the cheeses and a little bit of the dairy that you might eat are going to have carbohydrates. So it's not truly a zero carb diet. It's better. It would be better termed to just be a carnivorous diet. I think that's the first thing we have to sort of clear up. And then if we look at how strange it is, because it is strange. I mean, if you would have asked me about it even 2 years ago, I would have said you're out of your mind. It's just ridiculous. And then until you start studying the people that do it, and then you do it yourself, and then you find out, wow, not only is it sustainable, I can do it easily. I'm not even remotely tempted to eat sugar or plant foods, and my health is great, and I'm not getting sick. So, but let's look at it in terms of, you can look at it in terms of evolutionary terms, and you say, well, what do we know is normal today? Everybody eats a lot of processed carbohydrates. It's everywhere. Everywhere you go, you're going to see some fast, quick, ready processed carbohydrate food available everywhere. So everybody eats it just because that's what's around. If you roll the clock back a couple hundred years, this is just when, you look at some of the old historical texts, they start talking about, most of the food was meat, but the vegetables were kind of still new to some people. Some people didn't even know how to cook with vegetables yet because it was kind of a new thing. They ate them a little bit, but if we look at how we had food availability, we didn't have refrigeration, mass transit wasn't available. So if you didn't live in an area where there was a lot of vegetables, you didn't eat a lot of vegetables, but the animals could live there, so you ate those. Then if you go back 10,000 years, when we just invented agriculture, we're just starting to introduce that to our diet. But then if you go beyond that, say 50,000 years ago, it's arguable how much vegetables were around. Fruits, if you were in Africa or in a warm environment, then you probably had a little bit more access to that. But if you lived a little bit north of that, say Europe, Asia, and not to mention the fact that most of the time when humans were evolving, if we say Homo sapiens have been around at least 300,000 years, we know now, and it's probably closer to 500,000 speculated because they found fossil records of skeletons 300,000 years old with certain tools. They found those same tools in other sites about 500,000 years ago that are 500,000 years old. So they speculate that maybe Homo sapiens are actually 500,000 years old. But if you look at the climate during that entire time, most of it was ice age. There were interglacial periods of 10,000 years, but they'd go 50, 60,000 years with ice age. And it's not to mean that everything was covered in ice, but what happens is that the entire plant growth changes. So instead of these lush tropical forests you get in real hot environments, now that the earth temperature is 15, 20 degrees cooler, you're getting more grasslands and stuff like that. So then you have all these big herds of animals and grass. And so what are you going to eat? You're going to eat the animals. You're not going to eat the grass. So there was a period of time in our evolution, where likely the majority of our diet was animal-based. You might have had a little bit of plant-based stuff there, but for the most part, we're going to be eating animals. And so if you say, well, now what's weird? If we look at humans have been on the planet, and the homogenesis is 3 million years old, probably the same thing. So the majority of the time, it's arguable via climate data, via fossil records, via stable radiocarbon dating that shows that we ate tons and tons and tons of meat, as much as wolves or other predators. It's not that weird in the overall perspective. But if you look at it in 2017, yeah, it's really weird because there's not many people that do that. And there's a lot of cultural pressure not to do that. You know, if you go to a party and someone's serving cake, you know, what are you going to do? No, I just eat meat. And they think you're kind of strange. So there's a lot of social stuff that makes it weird. I don't think there's a lot of biological or evolutionary stuff that makes it weird, though.
Got it. Are there any recorded civilizations that just ate meat, or is that is there some records of that?
Well, I mean, certainly if you look at some of the Arctic populations, the Sami, the Inuit, you know, the Maasai, you know, there's several historical populations that ate just meat, at least most of the time. There may be some periods, you know, like, you know, particularly the Arctic populations in the fall for a couple, maybe a month or so, they might have access to some berries. But generally, I mean, they've eaten meat. I mean, almost exclusively. It's the only thing that's available to them. And so we know these populations have lived, and we've got pretty good documentation that. Now, some people will argue that, yeah, they had a few berries and they froze a few berries, but realistically, you know, 99% of their diets could come from meat. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not hard to find that information. Got
it. So, real quick, what can people eat on a zero carb diet, or is that just a one-liner, one word answer?
Well, I mean, again, it's just a carnivorous diet, so you can eat whatever meat you want to. You know, I mean, anything. You know, if it's beef, pork, chicken, lamb, organ meat, you don't have to eat organ meat. Some people think you do. I don't think you do. I don't eat organ meat. I just don't like it very much, and so I don't really include it. It's not really affected me negatively in any way that I can tell. There are thousands of other people that do it the same way, and they don't seem to have any problems with it. You can eat grass-fed. You can eat not grass-fed. You can eat fish. You can eat shellfish. You can eat dairy and cheese and things like that. Although some people have issues with dairy. You know, you can eat eggs. You know, as far as drinking, most people drink water. There are some people that still drink coffee, and some people occasionally indulge in some alcohol, but for the most part, it's just an animal-based diet. Now, some people use spices just to spice their food or put salt in their food, but generally that's kind of what it is. There is if you look at the entire animal spectrum, I mean, there's a lot of animal products you can eat. You know, if you like different types of bacon and pork and chicken and, you know, beef and different cuts of beef and organ meats and, you know, fish and shellfish and cheeses and dairy, you know, all that stuff you can do. So you can make it. Interestingly, you can make it fairly broad, you know, and just exclude the plant category. But a lot of people that do this, they find that even though it's already a relatively restrictive diet, they get more and more restrictive. Some people just drop down that all they'll eat is red meat or hamburger and water, and they're happy, and they're like, I feel better this way, and I like it better this way. And so you would expect, rather than getting bored, the opposite happens. They become to where they're just like, oh, this is what I eat. You know, it's almost like feeding a pet. You know, if you have a dog or a cat, you know, they get the same crap every single day. Now, whether it's dry dog food or kibble for the cats, you know, they eat that, and then the cat doesn't really sit there and go, well, I'm bored of my food. They just eat it because they're hungry. And, you know, we can argue what's the right food for pets. I think, you know, our pets are obese and diabetic just like we are because they're eating grain-based, you know, foods. But I mean, if you, like my dogs, I just feed them raw meat and that's all they eat and they're happy. They don't sit there and say, well, tomorrow I'd like to have a little fish. And, you know, I mean, they can't talk, but I mean, they've never turned on me. And that's the same way I am. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's basically it. You just avoid, you know, you're avoiding fruits, vegetables, grains, sugars, you know, any sort of plant-derived food. That's basically it.
So what about certain animals that you can't eat? I mean, I understand I just poured the entire animal kingdom at you, but is there like a trend or a way you can deduce, okay, this animal is not okay, I shouldn't be consuming it?
Well, I mean, you know, what most people are going to eat, I mean, there's only 4 or 5 animals we eat generally. You know, we eat pigs, we eat cows, we eat sheep, we eat chickens and fish, basically. There's some other things. So there'll be some wild game, but there's a few animals like a puffer fish, that you get in a sushi plate that has some poison. There's some parts of animals. I know certain liver from certain animals, if you eat too much of that, can be very toxic. But for the most part, almost the entire spectrum of animals, if you go across the world, they're eaten. They eat monkeys and they eat dogs and they eat snakes, and people eat all octopus, they eat everything. People eat almost every animal on the planet, and it's safe to do so. Now, if you compare that to the plants that are out there, you can only eat about 1.5% of all the plants out there. If you start randomly going to eat leaves off trees, you just can't, you'll get sick. You'll die. You might die. Some of it may kill you, but you certainly get sick. You won't be able to, it's not palatable, it's too bitter. So when we look at what's available for humans to eat, 99.99% of the animal kingdom is, and about 1% of the plant kingdom is, and most of what is edible, we've had to cultivate and process and treat to make it edible. And so again, if you go back 100,000 years ago, when we didn't have those tools yet, these people that when they migrated out of Africa to these new places, they were not going and sampling all the new plants. Well, maybe they were. Maybe they had the guy who was a plant tester that nobody liked and said, hey, your job is to try the plants to see which ones don't kill us. But they were following these animal herds because that's what their food was. And that's why they migrated. And that's why we conquered the earth, because we weren't looking for different plants to eat. We were just following our food, which was animals.
Got it. Can you eat carnivores?
You can eat carnivores. I have. Well, I don't think I haven't. My understanding is they don't taste as good. So,
just theoretically.
Yeah, but I think people have and do. But I think in general they don't taste as good as some of the other animals. So.
Okay, got it. So one of the things I get to hear all the time, and you probably get to hear all the time, is fruits and vegetables. So do you need that extra fiber? Do you need those extra nutrients? So what's the issue here?
So I would say that fruits and vegetables, it's context dependent and it's relative. So if your diet is basically, the standard Western or standard American diet where it's junk food and processed, refined grains and sugary stuff, addition of fruits and vegetables to that diet is going to be an improvement, I think. Now, for my diet, where it's just pure meat, addition of fruits and vegetables is not going to displace anything bad out of my diet. Okay, so I think it's just a matter of displacement. There are certain chemicals in fruits and vegetables which we have sort of graciously called phytonutrients. Actually, it's a better term to say just to call them phytochemicals. The reason those plants have those chemicals is so that bugs or other animals don't eat them. They're not making their little chemicals so for our benefit. It's so no one eats them, basically, for the most part. And they have other things that protect them from their own chemicals. They have antioxidants that protect themselves. And so, to say those things are essential for our diet, I think is, again, relative. Again, if your diet is deficient in other nutrients, like I said, if you do eat this processed cardboard stuff, then fruits and vegetables are going to give you some degree of nutrition beyond that. If your diet is basically, highly meat-based or all meat-based, those vegetables and fruit are unlikely to contribute anything more significantly to what you already have. Now, there's some RDA stuff which shows that meat is deficient in certain micronutrients. You can use things like folate or magnesium, manganese, vitamin C. Vitamin C is a big one. Well, one of the problems with the way those things were developed is it wasn't really looking at specific populations. And so a carbohydrate eater has different nutrient requirements than a meat eater does. And so we know that those metabolic processes require different cofactors. And so when you're eating carbohydrates, you need different nutrients to make that system run well. When you're not eating those things, your requirements are likely different. And that's why we're seeing all these people that are just on all meat diets that are thriving. If that weren't the case, then these people would all be getting vitamin deficiencies and sick. And I could use myself as an example. Like I said, I'm constantly improving athletically, breaking world records despite not having eaten a vegetable in almost a year now. And so if they're vitally important to my health, I would expect to see at least my athletic performance decrease, if not my health. And I haven't seen that. In fact, the opposite's been true. Fiber, this is I constantly have this sort of discussion with different people that think fiber is essential. Fiber, we know that fiber does seem to have an effect where it can kind of mute the amount of sugar that's, glucose that's released for a temporary period of time. So it may mitigate a high sugar diet. It also does bulk up the stool. And so if you're, and so you have a bigger stool volume. But when you're on an all meat diet, you just don't make much stool. I mean, everything is absorbed readily. I mean, we're designed for that. So we don't, when you're on this plant-based high fiber diet, a lot of that food is indigestible, the insoluble fiber, especially the cellulose. And so that gets into your colon and you have this big volume of cellulose in your colon. And then you need this microbiome to work correctly, to digest that and ferment and make all this gas. And, you have all this indigestible matter. And so if your microbiome is not dialed in correctly, which so many people it possibly isn't, then they've got to deal with this undigested fiber that it can't deal with. And then you have these problems. On an all-meat diet, you don't have all that fiber sitting around there. So the microbiome that was required for a plant eater is not required to that degree for a carnivore. Now, there's still bacteria in there, and they do a little bit different job, but you don't have this massive fermentation requirement that you do when you're eating plants. And to be truthful, humans do not have very good fermentation capacity when we look at other animals that are better, certainly ruminants or even primates. Primates have this huge hindgut fermentation capacity, this very functional cecum, which humans have just a residual pouch that doesn't really harbor much. So we don't really have much, hardware for this fermentation. Now we can put some microbiome in there and it can help us a little bit, but we can't really derive all that much nutrition from it relative to what we can get from eating meat. Meat is almost completely digested and absorbed before it even hits the colon. And so that's one of the reasons that, the people that claim fiber is that low fiber diets are a problem is because you're just not making anything. But I have bowel movements, pretty much every day. It's a lot smaller than, I have a 4-year-old child who still eats a lot of fruits and vegetables. And, I look in the toilet and his bowel movements are like 6 times larger than mine. And he's a 4-year-old kid. It's because all that stuff he's not digesting. And I'm eating 4 to 5 pounds of meat today and putting out a fraction of what he is. But it's not constipation. It's just I'm not wasting as much. I'm absorbing what I'm eating. And that's why I think this diet has been so helpful for so many people that have been malnourished. I think there's a huge issue with malnourishment out there. I mean, if you look at third world countries where they have very little access to animal products, you've got this horrible problems with starvation and malnutrition. You see all these skinny kids that you see pictures of, and once they add meat to their diet, whether it's chicken or eggs or dairy or anything, it improves them dramatically. And we have the same problem in the U.S. It's just that our malnourished people are obese. They've just got these rolls of fat, but they're still lacking all this vital structural integrity. Their bones are weaker, their organs are not working as well, their brains start to atrophy. And I think that's largely due to the fact that we're not taking in what we're designed to eat, and we're displacing it all with mostly processed garbage, the stuff we see on the grocery shelves and boxes. And then the fruits and vegetables only can mitigate that a little bit. They're not as good at it as, like I said, as a meat-based diet.
Got it. So I want to backtrack just a little bit. This question just came to my mind. So how we, in the agricultural world, we're consistently modifying plants to adjust to the people and different parts of the world. Have the animals undergone certain evolution or change that has affected the quality of meat? Has that happened here too?
Well, I would say to some degree, sure. I mean, I think we've changed every bit of the food we have. We went from, again, it depends on how far back you want to go. If you want to go back 50,000 years, then our food has changed radically. If you go back 10,000 years, it's still pretty radical. In the last 100 years, we've developed this ability to, produce foods that in no way, in shape, form look like their early predecessors did. We've got fruits that are giant fruits filled with sugar. They all have to be perfectly shaped. Their skin has to be perfect. There's all these different pesticides and chemicals we put on them. The animals, we've given them hormones to increase the yield. We do different things. I'm sure there's animals that are bred to produce more meat. There's all kinds of things that we do to that. The question is, I would say certainly the quality of food we have today is not as good as what we could have gotten even 100 years ago. I think there's no doubt about that. But the bottom line is it's the food we have. Can we improve on that? Yes, likely. We have to change our strategies, if we're gonna get more people on a sort of a meat-based diet, then I think Peter Ballestat is pretty good about talking about reclaiming the forage land. We've got a lot of that we could easily. Well, I think we could easily do. I'm not an expert on that, but I think there is a lot of people saying that we could do that, and we could feed a lot more people if we just had the willpower to do it. Unfortunately, we've got this really big push that everything needs to be plant-based now, and the plant-based food, I think is just nutrient poor relative to what you can get in animal-based food. I mean, you can feed a lot of people. We've got a population that's going to hit 9 billion. By, I think it's what the projections are, I think 2050 or 2030. And so we've got to double our food population. And the easiest way to do that is just to pump out more cheap grains. And that's what we've been doing, in the U.S. and now in Europe and the rest of the world. Now we're starting to see this obesity taking over in China and India and other places that were traditionally thin just because we're putting out all this grain-based food. And that's going to happen in Africa and South America already, and other places it's occurred. And so we can feed all these people, we can make them fat and sick. So we have this huge population of fat, sick people that are all disabled. And then you're going to ask, well, maybe are we just going to have robots do all the work for us? I don't know where the future's going. But I mean, for me, I'd rather be healthy. And, but to answer your question, yes, the food today is not as good as it was. Are there things we can do to make it better? I'm sure there are. And hopefully we can all make a change. There are a lot of people that really are opposed to animal agriculture. Obviously you've got vegans and stuff like that that are ethically opposed to that. And I think they have some things that are right. I mean, I think certainly there are things we can do better, and I think it's upon us meat eaters to try to help that happen. But in the meantime, malnourishing yourself by not eating meat is not the answer. We have to say this is our food, and we want it better, and we're willing to pay for that, and we're willing to support that.
Before I forget, this would be my question right away, is that what is your biggest critique of the meat industry here? What would you like to see it changed?
Well, I mean, I'm not a farmer or a cattle rancher. I've got a few cattle ranchers who follow me on Twitter, and I think most of them tell me, hey, we really care about the animals. We really do our best to ensure their health as much as we can. The bottom line is, if you're going to eat meat, I mean, your animals are going to be killed to do that. There's no way around that. And even if you're going to eat plants, and we talked about this before we got on there, even if you eat plants, you're going to kill animals. You're going to, planting those crops, you're going to kill rabbits and squirrel, whatever, mice, and all these little animals that die, and they don't even get eaten. At least with the cows that we even though they die, we're going to eat them. We're going to get some use out of their sacrifice. Where those other animals, they just die for no real reason. But yeah, I mean, again, if there's examples of overcrowded chickens and pigs and stuff like that, certainly, I think that's something that we should say, hey, look, let's see if we can do better about that. Certainly, I think probably from my understanding, and again, I'm not an expert, I think the cattle probably are treated the most humanely of those animals. Maybe sheep. Sheep tend to be free range. Cattle spend about 85% of their time on grasslands, whether they're grass-fed and finished or the conventional ones. Most of their time is spent roaming the land on grass. It's just that last couple months of production where they kind of bring them in and they feed them the grains and confine them a little bit, and then of course they slaughter them. But I think if you compare, if we were to go out and say, okay, we're not going to eat any more cows. And look and let them run wild and do like they do where, a place like India where, there's a large Hindu population that for religious reasons won't eat cattle. They've got the most cattle in the world. There's 1 billion cattle in India, which is kind of interesting. So they've got all this, potential nutrition, but for religious reasons, they won't eat it. But if we take an animal in the wild, the way it's going to die is it's either going to get some disease and slowly suffer and die from an injury, or it's going to be eaten by a predator. And a predator is not going to, stun it and, kill it like we do. They're going to rip its guts out and eat it while it's still alive. And so if you want to look at, what's humane and what's not, you have to factor that argument in as well. Now, granted, we produce animals and we kill them before their natural lifespan, certainly. And so I think that's, I think it's, there has to be a pretty significant, if we could say if it was economically affordable to let a cow live out its natural lifespan of, I think, 10 to 12 years, maybe rowing the fields, and then you cull it at the end. That would appease the most people. Whether that's practical to be able to still feed people, I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. Maybe it is down the road if you had enough land, enough resources generated to it. I'm sure it would drive the prices up, though. There's another push for synthetic meat, and that's a whole different topic. And I think there's some problems with that.
Got it. Yeah, this becomes a very interesting philosophical, scientific. A lot of factors start to play into this once we get into the rabbit hole. But thank you for sharing that. Let's go back to our zero carb world. And so, what are some of the benefits that you have noticed in people who have gone into the zero carb world?
Right. So I'll talk about my personal anecdotes, and I'll talk about what I've read about. And like I said, hopefully we have this study coming up and we'll be able to sort of better quantify that. But for me, I noticed an improvement in strength pretty quickly. I saw about an 8% increase in overall body strength, about 8% increase in rowing power output, which was I think, again, directly related to strength. I noted, again, when I was on a ketogenic diet, I noticed a lot of positive things happening. I saw that a zero carb diet, those things just became even better, like some joint issues I had as an athlete, for 50 years of age. You kind of pick up a few little aches and pains along the way after, especially training hard all those years. And those things just kind of went away. I had a few little chronic niggly things that had bothered me for decades. They just went away. I had some quadricep tendonitis. My shoulder used to bother me some. I had some insertional biceps femoris tendonitis. Those things just went away. And I thought that was pretty cool. I also noticed some skin things. I think there are some, we call them age-related, but they're certainly related with insulin resistance. There's some skin things, like little things that appear as you get older that it just sucks getting older because you get these damn things that grow on your skin you don't like, skin tags and some other things that I've noticed, and those things went away. And so that was also, that's probably goes to showing that you're kind of reversing this problem with insulin resistance. Sleep got better. I think my cravings for any kind of sweet stuff just kind of disappeared. That was one thing that I think a lot of people on a low carb or ketogenic diet sometimes struggle with, is that, they'll kind of stick to this. They'll hit their macro ratios, but they'll always have this, man, I really want to make this keto fat bomb dessert. And they just kind of keep this sweet sugar addiction alive. And so a lot of people fall off the wagon. They fall off a ketogenic diet and go back to a standard diet. I think that sometimes is the case. They just can't quit the sugar. What I found personally, and I've heard countless times repeated, that, within, days to weeks to sometimes months, that those cravings just disappear. And so somebody can put a nice piece of chocolate cake in front of you and you don't even look at it as food. You don't even regard it as something you have any desire to eat or want to eat. And I had a huge sweet tooth. So there wouldn't be a dessert I would turn down, in a previous life. But now it's like, I'll prepare stuff for my kids. I'll make these, my kids have on a pretty healthy diet as much as I can, and they'll still want something sweet every once in a while. So I'll give them a little piece of dark chocolate, the typical keto stuff, or make them a cream-based dessert sweetened with a little stevia. But I have no desire for that stuff. I'm just like, I could care less. And so I think that has been what I've noticed. I've heard people talk about reversing things like irritable bowel disease, or irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disease, which would be Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I've heard people talking about depression going away, migraine headaches going away, joint pain, just like I'd seen going away, psoriasis clearing up, eczema clearing up, allergies going away, chronic, illnesses going away. All these things that, you sometimes hear the same thing with the ketogenic stuff, but I see a lot of people that were previously ketogenic and they go to zero carb and they just finally, at that point, they finally see that all those things go away. Now, not everybody does, but so many do that it's pretty remarkable that you can't ignore it. And what I question is, a lot of people are going from 10 grams of carbohydrates a day to cutting out the plants. And so the question is it really the carbs, or is there something in the plants they're eating? And if we look at what's in plants, we tend to think it's just our sort of upbringing that fruits and vegetables are good for you and there's nothing wrong with them. Well, we know that certain plants, there's certain plants that sort of outright kill you. You can look at If you eat a bunch of raw almonds, it'll kill you. If you eat a bunch of apple seeds, you'll get cyanide poisoning. If you eat, cassava beans, I think those things cassava root, that stuff will kill you. Fava beans, I think raw will kill you. So we've got all these things in plants that are either deadly or maybe a little bit toxic, and we bred a lot out of it. And there's oxalates and salicylates and phthalates and phytates and glutens and gliadins and all these things that are in different plant compounds that, may have a deleterious effect to us. And so, and it might be really low grade. For me, I was like, when I cut them all out, I just noticed I felt better. I didn't really think I was sick. I thought, well, I'm working pretty good. I'm still an athlete, but when I cut it all out, I just noticed my guts felt better. My mood was better. And so you wonder, maybe those things are having this kind of a low grade effect that's just kind of knocking our health back a little bit. And most people don't even realize they're sick. It's kind of funny because most people, and a lot of people say that I didn't even know I was sick until I got better. And I think we've kind of, if we look around the population and see where everybody else is at, and you try to compare yourself to the average, if I could try to compare myself to the average 50-year-old, I'm like some kind of, I could go there. I mean, it's just like, because the average 50-year-old is on 2 or 3 meds, they're obese, they've got hypertension, they're unhappy, they're depressed, they can't do anything, their joints all hurt. But that's what people perceive as normal. And so if everybody around you is like that, then you think, well, that's how it's supposed to be. And so until you get out there and like I said, and like what you said, really step out of the box and say, wait a minute, this is different. The grass is a little greener over here, to sort of use a funny pun with eating meat. But it's just something that, until you see it, and all the people that criticize me about this, they just haven't experienced themselves. There's a couple of people who've done it in a couple of weeks and they say, oh, I got constipated, I didn't want to do it. But I mean, the people that have done it for a significant period of time, several months to years, they're just like, I would never even consider going back to the way I was. And so, with a lot of different diet schemes, you have seen people, vegetarian, vegan diets, the zone diets, people fall off those all the time. The people that fall off the zero carb diet are people that can't quite shake their carb addiction. And I keep seeing this, they come back over and over again. They come back and they say, that is the best I've ever felt in my life, is being on a zero carb diet. And so even though I haven't lost any weight on it, and it's not really a weight loss diet, and I don't want to put it out there that it's a weight loss diet. I think it's just how you're supposed to eat. And I think that weight takes care of itself later. It's not a crash diet by any means. But people that leave that, you see people that leave and then 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, they come back and they say, I just felt better. This is the best I've ever felt. And that's remarkable to me. You don't really see that with vegans that leave. Most vegans that quit, they never come back. They say, I felt horrible, I got sick. It's not to say that there aren't healthy vegans. There are some people that are healthy. I mean, you can obviously find examples of that. But a lot of them that quit, they never come back. And I've seen a lot of the people in the low carb community that were former vegans and vegetarians, and they're like, that was the worst health of my life. And I'm just not seeing that. And maybe because of the population size is relatively small, and maybe later on, maybe more people try it, maybe we'll see that. But at this point, based on the 20 or so thousand people that I can kind of look at, I'm just seeing all these people saying it's the best health of my life. And, despite what my weight is, I'm happy.
So I'm curious now about the long term. Have you noticed any people who have been on the zero carb diet for an extended period of time, not just 3 months or 5 months?
Yeah. So if you go to the, there's probably more, but there's 3 sort of bigger groups that have a lot of people. One is called Zeroing In on Health. There's a guy named Charles Washington who started this group, and he's done it about a decade. And there's several people in that group that are 5, 10, 7, 6, 3, 4, lots and lots of them. And there's hundreds and hundreds of those. And they're all, basically, it's kind of funny. The ones that have been doing it the longest are the ones that go to this really restrictive, just meat, just water, no supplements, not much eggs, not much dairy. Those people that do it longer and longer, the more restrictive they get. There's another group called Zero Carb Health that has a similar mix. And there's another one called the Principia Carnivora. And again, you get all these people that have years and years, even decades. There was a guy that used to call him the Bear, and he did it for about 50 years, and then he died in a car wreck. Maybe I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. But so you've got people. There's one family that was 20 years in. They've been doing it, and all they ate was ribeye steaks once a day. That was their meal. They feasted on ribeyes. They raise kids that way, and they're all, from everything I can tell, and again, I haven't physically examined these people, but everything they put up pictures of themselves. They look lean, muscular, healthy, happy. They claim they're in great health. And so, again, either all these people are lying or there's something to it. And then again, you can go back to these historical populations of Inuit, Maasai, Sami. There's all these historical populations that we can see that's shown.
Yeah, one of the things you just mentioned, which may be a little controversial, is kids. So what's your take on that? What do they need to start? Can they go zero carb at a very young age, or what are there restrictions here?
Well, I mean, again, this is controversial, and I think there are kids that do that, and from what I can tell, from the parents that have those, they claim their kids are very healthy. Again, you can look at traditional populations that raise children on basically all meat diets. We can go back to the Eskimos. So I think there's precedent to show that certainly has been done and can be done. It's tough to do it in today's world just because of the social pressures. I mean, my kids, I load them up on meat, and they know that it's good for you, and they're happy to eat it. When Daddy's cooking a steak, they're poking at it and telling me which part they want because they know which part tastes the best. And so they eat a lot of it. But I don't, like I said, if they want to eat some fruit, I'll let them have it. If they want to eat something else, I'll let them. I don't let them eat a bunch of junk food. It's hard to define that term, but we all can kind of know what we're talking about. Sodas and stuff like that. I kind of keep them to what people would call a more of a natural type of food. There's some people that processing is grinding hamburgers, processing is that processed meat. So those terms are harder to define. But in general, I think that probably it's okay. I mean, again, I'm not going to go out there and say that's the diet for every kid out there. I think that probably some more work needs to be done in that regard. I struggle to think about a reason why it would be a problem. I mean, just knowing what I know. But again, when you talk about kids or pregnant women, people get sort of all excited, even though we know that the current diet we're on makes kids fat and sick and diabetic and causes, infants to develop neonatal hyperinsulinemia, and then they're set up with this, they're sitting around behind the eight ball, they're already starting out almost diabetic. And so, even though, we have a diet that's sort of out there that people do, it makes everybody sick, but no one questions that. But when we have another diet that people are thriving on, and we're like, well, it's outside the cultural norm, we haven't tested, so it's dangerous. And so it's a tough topic.
Yeah. I totally get that. I see your position on this. So it seems like this might be, I know you just mentioned that fat loss isn't the main goal here, but as we know, a lot of people are interested in that. That seems to be the driving factor in a lot of these diets, just because of our culture. But here's my question for you. It seems like the zero carb diet is just perfect for this purpose because there's no hyper palatable food. It's very satiating. There's appetite suppression somewhat. It seems like there's no way you can go overweight on it. Have you ever seen anyone actually go the other side, like go overweight?
Yeah. So I think one thing, I think there is hyper palatable food. If you have a nice ribeye steak.
Okay, you got me. Sorry.
So, but yes, you do see people that gain weight, and I think there's several reasons for that. One is, it depends what diet you're on before. If you're on this calorie cutting restrictive diet, which so many people are before they come to this, because most people come to it from either severe calorie restriction or macro restriction, and they get onto this different diet, and then they sort of they end up eating more. So I think a lot of people that are underweight or under muscled, especially, we've got all these people that are overweight, but they don't have much muscle mass. When I do surgery on a really overweight person, I mean, I'll cut through, a layer of fat, 10 centimeters thick before I get to some really atrophied muscle, before I can get to their hip or their knee. And so we have these people that are even though they're overweight, they're under muscled. And so sometimes once they start eating meat and they start rebuilding those tissues, it's the whether their kidneys have shrunk, whether their heart has shrunk, whether their liver has shrunk, whether their intestines have shrunk, their skin has shrunk, their muscle tissue has shrunk, their bones have lost protein. They fill that all back in, and so that comes on as body weight. So some people will gain weight. Most people, not all, some people will even gain fat. I can talk about why that occurs too, but most people. It's even more so men than women, but most people notice a pretty dramatic reduction in body fat pretty quickly. But there's some people that sort of just get into this. I'm sort of nourishing my body. I've not eaten correctly for decades. If you look at a little child and you look what it takes to get from a child to a grown adult, it takes 20 years of eating to build all that tissue up. I mean, this doesn't happen in 2 weeks. You just don't put some Miracle Grow on your kid and give them a couple steaks and they grow 6 feet tall. It takes them 20 years of eating to develop all that adult-sized tissue. And so if you spend 20 years eating garbage and not nourishing yourself, that tissue starts to get depleted. And that's why we see these old people where everything is atrophied and they start self-cannibalizing their tissues because their nutrition just gets worse and worse as they get older. We clearly see that in old people. Their diets just get more and more processed, less protein, their teeth fall out, they can't chew meat. And so then they start cannibalizing all their tissue for vital functions. And so they're like, okay, what do you need the most? I need this to make my process work, so I'm going to cannibalize a little tissue. And so if you've got people that are already sort of on that process, so now they've got to rebuild all that stuff up. And it might take them 1 year, 2, 3 years of eating all this nourishment to kind of build their bone structure back up. It just doesn't happen in a couple of weeks. And so because of that, they sometimes will put on weight. And some of these people are they're lacking essential fats. And so you have, our brain is 70% fat by weight. All our nerve tissue is, all our cell membranes are largely fatty. And so you've got to build all that stuff up. So some people will actually even put on a little bit of body fat initially, but given time, this is what the people who have done this 10 years will say, that given time, and it may be a long time, that eventually normalizes. But while that's happening, even these people that are gaining weight, they may gain 5 pounds or 10 pounds. They're saying my joints stopped hurting, my depression went away, I feel better, my stomach feels better. So even though it's not necessarily a quick weight loss for a lot of people, it tends to improve their health. And I think that's important to realize that this is not, you don't go on this just to lose weight. Now, a lot of people do. Probably the majority of people do lose weight, but not all of them do. So I think that's an important thing to note.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to note everywhere, is that focus on health. Because I think you and I already know that there are people that look great on the outside, but are probably unhealthy on the inside. So let's move on to our next question, which is, are there any potential downsides or red flags that you might notice on a zero-carb diet you need to be aware of or be alarmed of?
Well, certainly, there's issues with transition. If you transition to any diet, whether it's going from a regular diet to a vegan diet or a regular diet to a ketogenic diet, you're going to have some transition issues. You're selecting a new fuel source. If you're not fat adapted, then you're going to have to deal with that. And so your body takes a while to sort of rebuild that metabolic machinery to ideally process fat rather than glucose as your fuel source. And so you're going to a lot of people initially will start out maybe lethargic. I know for me, I had some headaches when I started, even though I came from a ketogenic diet already. I think it's just a fluid electrolyte management issue. And so some people will find that they have to salt their food. Some people will take electrolyte supplements initially. Most of that tends to go away with time. I think that, people, there's a lot of talk about the microbiome and a healthy microbiome, and that's going to change. If you stop feeding your body plants, your microbiome is going to change. And until it does, it may not, you may have issues with diarrhea or constipation initially, but once it kind of does that, and you get on this regular feeding pattern, but that quiets down. And most people that are on a zero-carb diet will say their digestion is best it's ever felt in years. They're not making all these fermentation products. They don't have a lot of gas. They don't have a lot of bloating. They have these normal sort of healthy, regular bowel movements that are not painful. You can see people that have, there's different medical conditions. If you look at a gastric bypass patient, they've had part of their intestines removed, so they have malabsorption issues. And so those people might have to be aware that they may need additional supplementation just over and beyond what any diet would provide them. And so that's probably still going to be the case there. There's issues with price. Sometimes, if you want to do an all grass-fed diet, and most people eating this, even small women, will eat 2 pounds of meat a day, which sounds like a lot if you haven't done that before. But I eat 4 or 5, sometimes 6 pounds of meat a day, and I'm weight stable. It's not like, and I exercise hard, but it's not like I'm spending 3 hours a day in the gym. I'm in there, 45 minutes, maybe an hour at most, just because I don't have much time to do it, even though it's highly intensive. But that can be expensive. And so one of the things that I've sort of done, and I've kind of looked at this and I've said, do I have to have grass-fed? And I think there's an argument for there's an ethical argument for grass-fed, and there's an ecological argument for grass-fed. I think those things are valid. But if you look at a health argument for grass-fed, I don't think it makes that much of a relative difference, as to what actually is getting into your body and is doing in your body. I mean, there's a slightly higher omega-3 to omega-6 ratio when you look at grass-fed beef versus conventional fed beef. But then when you compare that to pork or poultry, or God forbid, like, certain oils, it's so minimal. It's like looking at relative risk versus absolute risk. When we talk about all this scaremongering that Professor Noakes talks about, where they'll look at a hazard ratio and says red meat is 18% more likely to cause colon cancer, but when you look at the real numbers, it's 5% versus 6%, so it's minimal. So if you look at it the same way, grass-fed versus grain-fed, for those things, it's just not that much of a difference. So if you can accept the fact that, hey, we can work on improving the environment and work on improving the animal ethics, but in the meantime, all I can afford to do is eat grain-fed beef, and I can only afford it from Walmart or the cheapest store I can find it from. That's fine. That's still going to be better for you than trying to say, I'm going to eat organic strawberries and blueberries and local fresh things that I can't afford, because it's a lot of people really can't afford that. And I've gone to different fast food places, and again, the fast food industry has been demonized, and I think for good reason. I think there's a lot of bad stuff they do, but they do serve 100% beef, and they don't cook it in oil. I've sat there and watched them and asked them how they cook it. They just cook it right on the grill. It's 100% beef. There's not fillers in this stuff. Yes, it's conventional, conventional beef in most cases, although you can get some places that have grass-fed, but it's cheap. You can get a pound of cooked meat for $4. And that's generally pretty reasonable for a lot of people. And again, it's dependent on where you live in different parts of the country. And then there's other things like there's different websites you can go to find that sale. That's what I do. I mean, I go to these sales. I look on an internet site, and it's called mygrocerydeals.com, and it tells me where can I get ribeyes for $5 a pound. And I'll look and I'll say, okay, then I'll go buy 10 or 12 packs of them, stick them in my freezer, and then I'm eating pretty cheaply. So price can be an issue, but I think you can get around that. There's some social stuff, obviously. For me, I'm 6'5", 240 pounds. I'm an athlete. I'm a doctor. Most people don't harass me about what I eat, because I say, well, look at you, look at me. But for those people that are maybe morbidly obese and eating this way, people are going to look at them and say, hey, look at you. Here's a story that it's embarrassing that I'll tell it. But when I was in my surgical training, and I might swear with this, sorry. When I was in my surgical training, I remember when I was an intern doing general surgery, I remember listening to the chief resident. This is the guy who's in his fifth year, and I'm in my first year. He was berating this patient, this obese patient. He was literally screaming at the guy, why are you so blank fat? What do you do? Eat just nothing but blank and blank lard all day. And the poor guy is almost in tears, and we're in here going, oh my God, But the point is, people are told that if they eat fat and if they eat meat, it's going to make them sick and they're going to get fat. And that's the reason for their problems. And unfortunately, that sort of that's been sort of perpetuated, and it still holds up. And so people out there that are going to Wendy's eating the Baconator with no bun are looked at like, well, you're just going to get a heart attack. When probably that's not the case, and probably that's one of the healthier things they can do. So yeah, there's some cultural stuff. I've seen some people that will say, depending on how much fat content into the food, they may develop diarrhea, and they fix that by going a little leaner. I can't say I've seen a lot of people have really bad side effects. I've seen some people that said initially their joint pain got worse, which I think there's some reasons for that. I think one of the things we know is even with a ketogenic diet, that when we bump up our ketone levels, it competes with the excretion of uric acid from the kidneys. And so you may precipitate a gout episode. And so that can happen. I've seen some people there's other thoughts that people that, our body fat is a natural reservoir for different toxins that we take in through the environment. So they're stored in our body fat, just like our fat soluble vitamins are. And so when you start liberating that fat and losing weight, sometimes those toxins kind of get released. And I'm not sure how much there is to that, but there may be some. And so some people may notice, that causes some issues. But generally, most people, if they stick with this for 2 months, 3 months, wow, it's really hard to find people that are struggling. At least not very many of them.
And this brings us to a very interesting study that you're about to conduct, which is called N=many. And I assume you're going to be answering a lot of these questions. Would you like to talk about it?
Right. So there's another carnivore named Matt Mayer who we kind of went back and forth on Twitter, and I kind of noticed that he was pretty good with computer stuff and was a bit of an entrepreneur. And I said, hey, Matt, let's meet for lunch. So we met together and had a nice steak. And so we talked about it, and he and I both shared the same thought. And we said, well, I think there's an appetite. There's a lot of people out there that are confused. They feel like they've been misguided. They've been let down by our government, our healthcare system, our different research bodies that have just kind of, put all these studies out and all these recommendations, and all these people are sick and getting sicker. And so there's people that are certainly biohacking or N=1 self-experiment. There's a big group of people that are doing that. The problem with that is that everybody that does that becomes this N=1. And so it's really hard to tell what works for him might work for another person. And some of the stuff that they're doing is stuff that the traditional research bodies won't do. Like for example, the zero carb study. There's no money for that. Nobody wants to do that. But there's a will, or at least I think there is. And so what we've been doing is, trying to say, well, how many people would be willing to actually do this? And you'd be surprised. I've got multiple doctors that are interested in this study. We've got all kinds of people that are willing to do the data, help do fundraising. And so there's a big will out there. So I think you can bring these people together and put them all in the same protocol, and then just test the same thing at the same time. And then we can start to say, okay, this N=1 stuff is starting to become more like real data. Now, there's going to be a lot of critique about this. There's a lot of limitations on what we can realistically do. But with this first study, and we're hoping to do several more and test a lot of different things, not just with zero carb, but with maybe ketogenic diets and all kinds of other things, looking at supplements and these types of things that you can bring, big numbers. We're right now, I've got a couple hundred that are interested in this, and I foresee if this takes off, we might start get to where we can get thousands and 10,000 of people participating, and then you can use those big numbers to really find things out quickly instead of doing these 20 people locked in a metabolic ward experiment that costs all this money, and then you question the results anyway. And so I think there's a big potential out there. And so right now, this first study is really just a proof of concept. Can we do it? Can we bring all these people together? And can they all stick to the same, sing from the same page? And can we fund it? Can we get people to do this? And then our plan is, we're not doing this to necessarily publish a paper right away. We just want to make sure that we can actually try this and then just make the data available for people so people can look at the data. Look, with most studies, they kind of hide their data behind paywalls, or they statistically modify the data. It's my goal, just like, here it is, here's the raw data. You can look at it, and we'll try to analyze a little bit for you and sort it for you. But for the most part, we're trying to make this, with the tagline for that is knowledge for the people, by the people. And, it's not me doing the studies. It's people coming together, self-organizing, using this as a venue to sort of say, okay, what else do we want to look at? Like I said, we could say, okay, I've got knee arthritis. I've got 100 people that have knee arthritis. Let's put them all on a ketogenic diet. Make sure they all do the same thing, and then assess them. And you can get these research tools that we use, that they use in clinical research, which are subjective tools, which are what people care about anyway. When I tell somebody that has knee pain that their X-ray looks great, that doesn't help them because their knee still hurts. And so that's what we, as surgeons, we look at the product of our results, or the results of our product, and we say, well, everything looks good on paper. I don't know why you hurt. The patient cares about the subjective a lot, and then you start saying, well, maybe you're a little crazy, or So you put these people in these weird, if they don't match up to what your expectation is based on what you see, you tend to put them in this little box of, they're uncooperative, or maybe they're just unrealistic. But when you get all these people together with their subjective outcomes, and that's what really counts to people. How do I actually feel? They get together and they say, what actually made a difference and what got me there? I think that becomes pretty powerful. And that's what people are interested in. That's what, I'm quite frankly interested in.
Got it. So let's talk about the study a little bit further. Sure. So how many people are you guys recruiting? How long is this going to be carried out? And what kind of biomarkers are you guys going to be looking at?
Right. So, right now we're hoping, Matt's more the technical guy, and so he's developing some of the data collection tools. I'm sort of doing spreading a bit of the message and kind of answering questions a little bit. But so we initially, we asked everybody, well, how long should it be? What do you want to look at? And we got 300 responses with 300 different answers. So, it is trying to do it by democracy is a little tough. And so we thought that 3 months was a reasonable time frame to see changes if we were going to see some. Some people in the zero carb community say, well, lab markers take 6 months to change. It depends what you're looking at. And typically you're looking at lipids, which I don't have quite honestly, a lot of faith in looking at lipids for a lot of reasons. But, things like hemoglobin A1C and, different things that occur over 3 months, I think we can certainly look at. So initially, we've got about 200 people right now signed up, ready to go. We're still taking people. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to cut that off, because at some point we have to say, okay, this is our initial cohort, and we will plan on doing more in the future if this goes well. So certainly, if there's people who want to get on something later, we'll probably sort of support that as well. But I'm guessing we'll get around 200, 250 to start with. We'll go for 90 days. The protocol is, eat just meat and drink just water. And people ask me to define meat, and I'm okay. Well, it's anything from an animal. It's, you can eat organs, you can eat chicken, you can eat fish, shellfish, those things I consider meat. So that's what you eat. You drink water. We'll say that eggs are kind of an extra thing. Dairy is kind of an extra thing. You could do a little bit of that. We're trying to minimize dietary confounders. And so if you look at a traditional meat is bad epidemiology study, it's meat is bad, but what else did they eat? Did they eat the hamburger with the French fries, with the Coke, with the shake, with the apple pie? And you can't sort that out. So we want to really keep this really nice and narrow so we can limit all those different confounders. Now, there's other confounders that are going to be in there: age, sex, activity level, and so on and so forth, disease status, and we're going to track all those things as well. But initially, there are a few things we're going to track. We're going to try to get an accurate assessment of what everybody ate. One of the criticisms again of epidemiologic studies are these food frequency surveys, which you ask somebody what they ate over the last 6 months, and they have to basically guess. So we're going to have people track every day what they ate, exact amounts. We'd like to know how much it costs. Just to get an idea how much you're spending for other people that may want to do this. We're going to track bowel movement stuff, because all these people come up with is you can have a bowel. So we're going to actually have people track that. How many bowel movements did you have a day? And then there's a Bristol stool chart that kind of grades them based on what their appearance is. And so we'll do that. We'll try to track their sleep. We'll track their activity level. Try to do that daily. And we're also going to track sexual function, because one of the big vegan propaganda ads right now is, meat, you can't have an erection or something because you eat meat. That, from what most people on a zero carb diet, and what I can tell you, is the exact opposite. Your libido goes way up. So we're going to track some of that stuff too. And then during the course of the study, we're going to administer a number of surveys that have been validated as research tools for things like depression, things like sexual function, bowel function, pain scores, things like that. Just to admit, because that's all stuff we can do relatively cheaply, okay? Then when it comes to labs, now that's going to depend on how much money we can raise for this. Now, there's some people in the group that likely will be willing to self-fund their own labs, and that's great. There's some people that just can't afford to do that. We're not going to exclude people because they can't do that. So we're hoping to raise funds, and then once we get to a certain point, say, okay, can everybody afford to do a fasting insulin at the end of the 3-month period? And if we get enough money to do that, we'll do that. And then we might say, what's the next step? Well, let's get some maybe a ferritin test, because that's something that people are really interested in. If you're eating all this heme iron, is your ferritin level going to go up? And does that equate to problems with health? So we may say, okay, if we hit the next level of funding, then we'll do that. And then if we get to the next level of funding, it might be, let's get lipid studies. I mean, I've had people ask for everything. They want, all this biometric testing, this visceral adipose tissue, CT scan, MRI, which that stuff that gets prohibitively expensive when you're dealing with 200-300 people. And so we've got to go with what we can afford initially. Now, once we show that we can get it, and I don't know, maybe we can't, maybe they'll all get sick, maybe they'll all die, maybe their teeth will all fall out and they'll all have scurvy. I doubt it. I wouldn't sort of be promoting this, but maybe that happens. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe all the people at the end, or most of them say, hey, I survived, I felt good, these biomarkers got better, my health got better. Then maybe we can start saying, okay, this is a viable option. Now we can start running these more interventional trials like we talked about, where we get 20 or 50 people. It's a little smaller group that do the protocol, and then we can assess, what changed or what didn't change, or we do bigger, more people. It just depends. But yeah, that's going to be that's the thing. And so we know we're going to do that. We can do for free. We're going to do that for sure. The lab stuff is going to depend upon funding at the end. And so we're going to, I've had people that have offered to help with fundraising. People have offered to donate. Hopefully, if everybody on the Facebook groups, Zero Carb Health, kicked in $1, we would have $25,000 to do, and we could do some decent testing with that. And so, it's just a matter of sort of seeing what's doable. And again, this is how the social media stuff I think is going to have to work, because I'm not getting an NIH grant. I'm not getting, Abbott Labs or Pfizer's not going to, they sure as hell aren't going to pay for this study. So we've got to see what is out there as far as, the will of the people to see this stuff be done. And if it's there, then we're happy to sort of run with that and facilitate that. And hopefully we can continue to do this over and over again.
And this will be such a fascinating paradigm shift in how research is being carried out. It's like no longer are going to be, researchers aren't going to be influenced by companies specifically or any sort of organization. You have the people, if they believe in you, if they have faith in you, they're going to crowdfund the entire research themselves, which is amazing. So,
well, again, this is projecting out in the future, but you might find that you might have actual, university researchers say, hey, I'm going to crowdfund a study, and if this becomes an accepted paradigm, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to complain about this, and there's probably going to be some people that attack it, and other things. I'm sure, people that aren't going to like the results will attack it. People aren't going to like the methodology, are going to attack it. Some people are going to like the ethics of it, and they're going to attack it that way. And so we'll just have to see. Maybe they'll come in and say it's illegal and you can't do it. I don't see why they would do that, because I think it's a freedom of speech thing. But we'll see what happens. Right now it's small. If it gets bigger, you're going to have a lot of people that are sort of upset by this stuff.
Got it. So one of the questions that I had for you was, and we were going to backtrack just a little bit as well, is about lab-grown meats. You said you had a certain gripe with them, or is there something that you think is going to be an issue over here? So what's up with those?
Well, I think one of the things when you, and again, it may change, but one of the things they talk about lab-grown meat, they're talking about, well, we can make lab-grown meat with low saturated fat. And then you can say, well, wait a minute, maybe we need that. Maybe when they start monkeying around with what's in there, then you have to say, is that even something we need as humans? And so we've already altered our diet somewhat. And so is that even a bigger step? And then again, you're taking cells that you're growing in culture, and there's things you have to do to make that happen. And are those things a problem? Are they potential carcinogens, or who knows? And so I'm not going to be the first one to experiment with that. Probably you'll have a lot of vegetarians that are excited about it, because quite honestly, most vegetarians, they want to eat. They have this. You've got all these fake meats out there because they like the taste of it. And there's a biological need, I think, for it. That's not being addressed. So they may try that. Again, I may be wrong, and it may be a way to again, right now it's pretty cost prohibitive, but I think the expenses will go down quite a bit. You'll probably see it maybe in a decade as something as a relatively economical option for people. But again, whether it's the best option, I'm not sure. I have this really, it's not that I'm anti-science or anti-progress, but I have this really simplistic view of how people are supposed to work, or animals in general are supposed to work. I think, we have a lot of natural things that are supposed to occur, like breathing, like going to the bathroom. I think eating is just one of those things. And I think there's a diet. And again, this is somewhat controversial, because there's this big movement towards personalized everything, personalized medicine, personalized diet, personalized disease management. And I think with diet, I think that humans are all one species, and I think if you ask somebody in the street, what does an elephant eat? They'll tell you they eat tree leaves. And if you ask them what a lion eats, they'll say they eat zebras. But if you ask somebody what a human is supposed to eat, they're like, who knows? And so, but I think there is something that we all can eat. We all pretty much likely can eat meat. There's a few people that have an allergy. It's kind of a weird thing when they get a tick bite. But I mean, I think if you look through evolution, you know, depending on how far you go back, we've always eaten meat. There's never been a society or culture that could live without meat, except for right now when you have this modern phenomenon of being able to bring all this food together and do the supplements with the vegan community. But I think when you go in the past, we've all thrived on meat, and we've all know that we can eat it. And I think it's all you really need. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. There's a lot of people who are doing that. So if you say that that's all you need to eat as a diet, then, you know, the other stuff you wonder is how necessary it is. And you know, it becomes complicated when you add all this other stuff in. Right now, you know, when I feed my animals, it's very simple. When I feed myself, it's very simple. When you start adding in plants and sugars and grains and all this fruits and vegetables, then you have to start thinking, well, what is my macronutrient ratio? What supplements do I need? You know, how much fiber do I need? Which probiotics do I need to take? You know, then you make it complicated. I think it's unnecessary to do that. But we'll see. We'll see what the study shows. You know, maybe all the people will say it's completely, you know, undoable. I mean, we've got quite a few people that are coming to this from a non-zero carb background. We've got quite a few zero carbers that, of course, have signed up that have already done this for years. And they're like, well, that's no big deal. I'll just do what I normally do and record it. But there's a lot of people coming to this that haven't done it before. And maybe those people will say this is completely unsustainable. I felt horrible and it's not how I'm supposed to eat. So I don't know.
Got it. Have you noticed any sort of I think we touched a little bit about it. Let's delve into it. Do you see a viable option in the athletic world as far as the zero carb is concerned?
Okay, so again, that goes to, you know, first of all, you have to look at, you know, fat adaptation, metabolic flexibility, and then I think you have to look at what is actually in, you know, especially red meat as far as performance goes. You know, I can only speak to myself. I mean, I know there's anecdotes of other people that are training and building weight, lifting weights and getting stronger. And a lot of people saying that they're hitting all these, you know, personal records in their different sports. You know, I'm probably the only one that's actually breaking world records at this point on this. And I'm 50 years old, so, you know, you have to temper that because they're age records. But, you know, I think from an athletic standpoint, I think there's there certainly could be a progression. I know at 50 years old, my interests are staying healthy. And I think if you're healthy, you can be a better athlete. I think recovery is very good on this diet. And I think recovery plays has a big impact on training capacity. You know, if you can't recover, you can't train that much. If you can't train that much, your performance goes down. And so I know when I was eating carbohydrates in a higher degree, I was sore more often. I just didn't have the recovery that I do now. And so my training frequency went down. My performance went down. Now, if we look at, you know, when I say, you know, there's people, you know, people say ketogenic diet is not good for performance. And so you're not going to convince those. Maybe you'll convince those people. And the reasons they say that is because, you know, you can't hit high levels of intensity without carbohydrates over certain distances. But a lot of the studies are done on these 3 or 4 week studies where they take some athletes and run them through a protocol for 3 or 4 weeks. I know Tim Noakes talked about that on your show the other day, where Louise Burke down in Australia did a 3-week study because that's all the funding they had. Well, during that time, all those athletes were adapting to a new diet. And so, you know, your performance is going to go down. I mean, my performance for the first 6 months of a ketogenic diet was down. It took me 6 months to get better, you know, back to my numbers. And then on a zero carb diet, coming from a ketogenic diet, my numbers dropped for about a month, and then they came back, and then they sprung back, and they've exceeded what I've done in years. But if you look at what's in a pure meat diet, look at what supplements are out there. Now I'm going to exclude things like steroids because they're illegal, and I don't take that stuff, and I'm pretty much against that stuff. But creatine, we know, is a pretty decent performance supplement. I mean, it's got at least show some. Most studies I've looked at have shown an improvement. Meat is full of creatine, especially in the quantities that I eat. You know, most people say, well, you'd have to eat 2 pounds of meat a day to get the amount of, you know, 5 grams of creatine or something along that. Well, I'm eating 4 pounds of meat a day or 5 pounds of meat a day. So I've got loads of creatine. Protein, we know that protein is good for performance, and you can argue whether it's plant protein or animal protein. I think there's pretty good studies out there that show that animal protein is superior protein for building muscle and performance. So meat, again, is loaded with that. We know that beta-alanine is another substance that seems to help with interval training, and meat basically has the precursors for that. So you can basically get that from meat as well. And there's probably other factors that we don't even know about. And so for me, I noticed a huge improvement in performance, just myself. If we look back historically, and again, most people talk about the Inuit and the Mongols and all these other big meat eaters, but they were always known to be very robust, they had very high capacity for work. I mean, they could fight for days without eating, these things. And so, how that translates into athletics, I think you can sort of interpret that as saying they were probably better physically capable of doing physical stuff. And so that can transition itself into athletics. The sport I compete in now, it's called indoor rowing, and it's very much a strength to weight ratio type of thing. If you get too heavy, it's harder to have the fitness, and if you're not strong enough, you're not strong enough to produce the wattage you need to. And so right now, at 240 pounds, I'm in a pretty good place to break world records. And I have a lot of rowers now that are watching, my Instagram account. They're watching me and going, "Wow, you're among the top guys in the world for sprint rowing. Even guys that are 20 years younger than you, you're competing with those guys." And I'm very vocal about this is a meat diet, and they're very interested. I'm getting a lot of people that are like kind of nipping at me and saying, "Hey, how would I implement this?" And so I think we're going to see some people that will test it, and again, it doesn't do any good for me as a 50-year-old guy to test. You're going to have to get some 20-year-old kid to say, "Hey, let me try this for a year or two and see where it goes." One of the things that, and it could be a strategy, I think we're seeing this strategy already, is a lot of athletes, the smart ones, they may start their career out on a high carb, Gatorade swelling diet, and then they start to transition away into this lower carb stuff, at least maybe in the off season. And so I think you're going to see more and more of that, more and more people willing to experiment. And I think, as this movement or exposure grows, and I think it is, I'm seeing more and more people. When I got on Twitter, I don't know, a year ago, I think I started, zero carb was not even talked about it. Now, all these low carb paleo keto guys are putting low carb paleo / zero carb in their little hashtags and their little comments, because they're recognizing that does exist, and there are people doing it, and people are thriving on it. There's a lot of people that are getting interested in that, and most of the people that are trying it are saying, "Wow, I'm really noticing some positive things in the gym, including in their health." And so I don't know. I'm an N as one as far as athletics is concerned. I'm going to keep doing it because I'm continuing to improve. Weekly I see improvements, and so my personal experience is yes, I think you can do very well athletically. It just remains to be seen how many more people are going to test it.
Yes, and that is very interesting at the same time, how we're noticing the improvements in athleticism, and alongside the fact that it is now being recognized in many of the communities. And I think that's very important, realizing some of these paradoxes, these things that have not been explored, but now we're finally getting to see, okay, zero carb is something. So let's move on to a question that is very popular in the community, which is, what is the sustainability of a zero carb diet? Do you have any opinions on that?
Are you talking about on a personal basis or on a global basis?
Let's go global. Do you have views on those?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I think the number of people that would actually adopt this diet is still very small. Even if you look at veganism, you've got 2-3%, worldwide adopting something like that. So I think, we might, if we got that, I think it would take many years for that to take off to that level. If you started getting several million people doing this, outside of the traditional populations, then you might start seeing enough accounts of, hey, this is the best health I've seen. Then you have to change our agriculture policies. You can't sustain a big population with what we currently do. Now, is it possible to do? I think you could talk to some agronomists that will tell you, yes, you can do it. You'd have to, like I said, you'd have to do stuff like Alan Savory's talking about with, reclaiming the desert lands by, putting forage animals on there, ruminants and stuff like that. So I think to make it sustainable, we have to change our current farming practices. But that's only going to happen if the will and the reason to do so is there. Otherwise, we're going to continue planting row crops and just cranking out the soybeans and the wheats and the corn until we can feed everybody else. And again, you can argue the merits of that and whether it's going to cause chronic disease or not. I think it will, and whether that's actually bad for the environment too, because I think there's some negatives for the environment with that stuff as well. So sustainability under current, if everybody in the world were to do it, no, we couldn't sustain that right now. We would have to change things significantly. There's a sort of a meme going around that says, one cow can sustain one family for 1 year. And so with 7 billion people on the planet, we only have about 1.3 billion cows right now. So we'd have to make 7 times as many cows and then have replacements ready to go to be able to do that. So you probably have to get 15 billion cows on the planet to do that. And so I think there's a room to do that. I mean, I may be wrong, but you could talk to some of the guys that are better qualified to talk about that. So yeah, I mean, I think a significant percentage of the population could do it and it would still be sustainable, but not the whole world yet.
Got it. So let's take it to the mainstream, as in, what do you see would be a challenge or concerns if most people go zero carb? Do you think there will be aspects of greed or social concerns that will come with it?
Well, I mean, goodness, that's hard to really think. I mean, my opinion is I would be very surprised if it became mainstream. We're still. If you walk around and look at people, most people don't even care what they eat. I mean, most people they just don't care. The only reason they care is if they get sick. And so you got to wait for people to get sick before they want to do anything about it. And so that's, at least, and then there's going to be there's still going to be a lot of confusing messages out there. And so people will choose different diet schemes. And so I just don't see it going, I just don't see it being the predominant diet of our population anytime in the near future. Now, it probably was a predominant diet, again, 50,000 years ago, and that was probably normal, but now it's so out there that people just won't accept it. I mean, there's these misconceptions, as a keto guy, you've got this cholesterol, people still think total cholesterol is the biggest predictor of heart disease, and there's probably no real evidence of that. There's people that deny that, insulin's a problem. And so you still got a big mainstream backlash against that. There's people that think you can't run your brain without 130 grams of carbohydrate, So had that been true, I would have ceased functioning, a year ago or 2 years ago, whenever I stopped eating much carbs. So, I mean, you to get through that is going to take probably, even if you had the most compelling science and, you had a lot of resources, which we don't, it would take decades to change that. So I can't predict it right now.
Awesome. So here's a bit of a controversial question that I think there needs to be a discussion that has to happen here. Someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, you're promoting cruelty to animals." So do you have a response to that?
Right. So, I mean, I certainly, I'm not thrilled about the idea that animals have to die so that I can eat. I mean, I understand. Every time I eat a steak, I realize that a cow had to die for that to occur. And so I'm all for anything we can do to improve their lives until we have to slaughter them for food. But it's never going to change the fact that we're going to slaughter animals. I mean, it's always been the case. It always will be the case. When I die, I'm going to be eaten by worms. I mean, it's just a cycle of life. It's just how biology works. And to deny that. And so if you sit there and say, I only eat plant food and it's guilt-free, I mean, it's just because you're denying what's actually happening. Like I said, there's animals that are dying so you can have your plate of kale and quinoa. I mean, it's just the reality of things. And so, should we do better by the animal standards? Absolutely. And I think, I'm as responsible for it as any vegan is. But to make a whole population sick by taking out the most nourishing nutrient in their diet in the name of animal compassion then you ask about, what about the human compassion? What about the people that develop all these diseases that I see, that I cut their legs off and cut their toes off and fix their joints because they've ruined their health by following this grain-based, agricultural-based diet. And so I think the vegans are right in the sense that diet is important, and we should push diet, not drugs. I mean, there was a film, that What the Health, that came out, and I basically said, yes, I agree with a lot of what they say with regards to the pharmacy industries and the food industries doing stuff. But then I disagree with obviously some of the details about how they interpret the science. But it's upon all of us to make the food sustainable, make it ecologically sustainable. But the answer is not to stop eating animals. I mean, that is just not going to work. It's going to end up with a sick human population, and sicker than we already are. We already eat a plant-based diet for the most part. I mean, something like 75 or 80% of our diet is already plant-based, and we're already a wreck, health-wise, population health-wise. And so going more and more in that direction is not going to turn that around.
And this also brings commendation towards you from me, because you're thinking, like we were talking, you're thinking outside of the box. You're approaching the whole problem from a whole new direction. What if this works? What if this is a good idea? What if this reduces suffering in humanity? And speaking of what the hell, from the message that I got from that movie was that everybody hates AHA, American Heart Association. Nobody spares them. So, but let's move on to our next question, which is, what are some of the popular criticisms of the zero carb diet?
Well, I mean, obviously you've got the animal cruelty one from the vegan group. I mean, most people will tell you that fiber is essential for your diet. There's people that say this is an incomplete diet. It's a mono diet. You're going to get nutrient deficiencies. There's people that will say, it's filled with saturated fat and cholesterol, and therefore you're going to have heart disease from that. They're going to say red meat causes colon cancer. They're going to say that plant-based diets. They'll use the blue zones to cite longevity in those particular populations that eat a largely plant-based diet. So those are and then they'll cite the epidemiology with saying meat eaters have different or higher rates of diseases based on the epidemiology. So those are the major ones that I usually see. All
right, and that's one thing we delved in the last podcast, and we explained what epidemiological studies are and how reliable and unreliable they can be. So do you have anything else to add over here that you want to talk about before we go into some of our rapid community questions?
I think that's pretty good. I think I've been talking quite a bit already.
Yeah, this was interesting. You're an interesting guy, man. You're awesome. You're like an information overload on my brain at the moment, which is great because I loved it. I was listening to it like a little 2-year-old kid with candy. Okay, bad joke. So, first question: do you supplement with anything?
I don't take any supplements. I take no vitamins. And again, I'm pretty adamant. I don't take testosterone replacement. I don't take steroids. I've been a pretty adamant anti-drug athlete my whole life. The only thing that I will use is a caffeine pill occasionally before I work on some workouts, because I don't like coffee. So, caffeine certainly, has a good performance benefit. We know that's pretty true. So I would occasionally use caffeine, a couple of milligrams of caffeine before some really hard workouts. Sometimes when I try to break a world record, I might take a little caffeine before that. But other than that, no vitamins, no minerals, no vitamin C. It's just pretty much meat.
Awesome. What about your blood work? How's that been throughout this period?
So I don't know, and so. This is an interesting thing because I've been doing this for a while now. And I mean, literally every week I get someone asking me for what's your LDL, what's your cholesterol, what's your testosterone, what's your microbiome, what's your, this or that. And so I haven't checked any of that stuff, partly because, I want to, give it a little more time. I've been 8 months. Maybe I'll do it at the year point just to say. But I also, this goes down to how do you define health? And so, for me, I just don't see blood markers in an otherwise healthy person to be that helpful. I mean, you can look at a guy named Dave Feldman with his his cholesterol drop study, if I can pull my cholesterol, and it can be anything. And it doesn't really mean a lot. You could argue that HDL triglyceride ratio is important in fasting insulin, and those things might have some value, and the C-reactive protein might have some value, and maybe looking at ferritin. But for me, I just look at what does it mean to be healthy to me, and that's what I check. And so when I get on a Concept 2 rower, and I know I can go 500 meters in 1 minute, 14.5 seconds and break the world record, then I know I'm pretty damn healthy. And, and I didn't do it by taking drugs. So, I think I'm pretty healthy. And so I just don't have a lot of excitement about doing these tests, even though in our study we're going to test things just because so many people are curious about it. But I don't have my personal curiosity about my own health is answered every time I look in the mirror or get on a rowing machine or lift weights or get up and wake up with a good night's sleep or whatever. I've got a lot of other metrics I think are more useful to me than comparing my blood test to somebody else, because it's going to be different. And if me and I'll pick on him, Dr. Greger, the vegan, says, well, Dr. Greger's LDL is only or his total cholesterol is 155 and mine is 220. I'm going to say, well, I don't really care. But some people will care. Some people say, well, obviously he's doing the right thing and you're doing the wrong thing. So I think those labs tend to be of limited value depending on what the context is. They're a lot of them are so variable. I talked about this on another podcast with blood testing. Blood tells you, it can kind of tell you what's going on in the tissues, but it's not an exact number because it's in flux. It's always changing. It's going up and down. And so you take any one blood sample and it might have changed just because you how much sleep you had the night before, or how much exercise you did the night before, when you last ate, or any other number of confounders. And so I don't have a lot of faith in that for chronic disease or chronic measurements of health. Now, there's some acute things in the hospital we look at that, if your hemoglobin is 4, you're bleeding. Yeah, we got to replace some blood. But there's other things in blood that are just, there's blood, what's in blood, and then there's what blood transports. And I think those things that what blood transports is often maybe an inaccurate picture. And we have to look at the tissues, and that requires either advanced imaging like a cardiac calcium score, or you can do tissue biopsies, and those things are just they're just not convenient to get.
Awesome. Next question is, some people are afraid of high protein turning into glucose through, I don't know, I have no idea what to say over here. Does that work over here in a very, very, very high protein diet?
Well, again, you have to define high protein. There's adequate protein and what you need, and then there's what you don't need. And so, again, this to me, so we know that gluconeogenesis occurs when we convert, different substances, whether it's, glycerol or, some amino acids into glucose, and our liver can do that. And that is usually, like most things in the body, is demand driven. So if you do not have a demand for glucose, if you're operating a fund, you're not gonna just automatically do this. It's not like the food you're eating is going to kind of automatically turn. Now, how do you get excessive protein? Well, if you're on an all meat diet, and again, this is a point. I think it's sort of a subtle point, but I think if you're on an all meat diet, your appetite dictates how much food you should take in, because that's all you're getting. It knows exactly what it's going to get. So if you're hungry, your body is saying to you, I need some sort of energy, I need some food, I need some structural materials for building stuff. So what you eat, and if you eat to satiety, you're taking in the right amount of protein. So you're not taking out excess protein. Now, if I were to do that, and then I were to take a big whey protein shake and pound out another 100 grams of protein and just kind of stuff myself beyond what I was hungry for, then potentially that stuff might be a problem. Okay, but I think you have to define what is high protein and what is adequate protein. I don't think you can do it based on how many grams per kilogram. I think if you're on the right diet, then your hunger is going to dictate how much protein you actually need, rather than saying I have 215 pounds of lean body mass, therefore I should take in 215 grams of protein or grams of protein every day. I think that's a flawed way of looking at that. It's a benchmark for some people, and you can look at the population, and most people in the population under consume protein. And so I think high protein is largely not a problem. I think low protein is a much bigger problem. And again, the vegans will disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But I think if you look at our elderly population, they're frail. Their tissues I can literally take my finger and stick my finger right through somebody's bone. When somebody's weak, elderly ladies, our bone is so, osteoporotic, and some of that has to do with a lot of protein deficiency, I think. And so, yeah, I think, again, too much protein you have to define first. But I think the diet I'm on is not too much protein. I think it's adequate protein.
Awesome. And what about the omega-3s and omega-6s, which seem to be everywhere, fish intake and all that jazz? How does that balance out, or is it balanced out on a zero-carb diet?
Well, again, and this is something that I think the bottom line is we don't know for sure. I mean, Harvard came out, and Peter Ballenstedt points this out. Harvard came out and said that we should have a 4-to-1 omega-3 or omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And we're not sure where they got that number from. If we look at grass-fed versus grain-fed beef, grass-fed beef kind of hits that number. Grain-fed beef just kind of misses that number by a little bit from a ratio standpoint. If you throw a piece of fish in there once a week, you're way over that number. So you can, if you said, I'm going to eat a zero-carb diet, and one day a week I'm going to have a piece of salmon or some sardines or something like that, which is perfectly acceptable, then you would throw that omega-3 ratio to where it needs to be. But again, you have to look at absolute amounts. And so, we have to look at, it doesn't, if you're taking in 1,000 times too much omega-6 fatty acids, but you're in the right ratio with your omega-3, that's still a problem because you're taking in too much of this stuff. So you have to figure out how much is what we actually need. There's some minimum dietary requirements on that stuff. And so, I think those things are more important to look at more so than the ratios necessarily. I mean, there's some blood tests you can do to look at your particular ratios, but I don't know that we know really for sure. I mean, if you want to hedge your bets and be on the safe side, then I'd say eat a zero-carb diet and throw a piece of fish in there once a week.
Awesome. And I think we've reached the end of our podcast, but I always ask this one question from everyone, which is, what is your message and what would be your vision? What would you like to see in the world?
Well, I mean, obviously peace and love and happiness. No, I mean, I think that everybody, I mean, you have to take your health in your own hands, and you have to be willing to experiment, and you got to be systematic about it. You have to be objective about it. And I think that, whatever you find, you should constantly sort of reevaluate that. But at the same time, there are people that it paralyzes them, and you still have to live your life. And you can't become a hypochondriac, and every little cold you get or every little bump you get or rash you get doesn't turn into a super experiment. You kind of look at general things, and you have to find out what it means to be healthy to you overall, and just eat and exercise, sleep, reduce your stress to make those things happen.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there's any last things that you have to add, if not, we can go forward to plugs, which include where can people find you, and or if you guys are still looking for more people for the study, how can they get in?
Yeah, so to find me right now, the two best places are going to be Twitter, SBakerMD, and then Instagram, Shawn Baker 1967. You spell Shawn SHAWN. The study, yes, we're still taking participants for at least for the next little while. You can go to the website, which is still barely developed. I'm learning how to develop web pages, so forgive me, I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm getting it down. My partner Matt will hopefully help me get this going quicker. But n=many.com, just spelled out, or you can email us at n=many@gmail.com and say I'd like to be part of the study, and we'll send you maybe a video link that describes it, and then we'll kind of go from there, and we'll send out more information as we get closer to the launch date.
That's fantastic. I would love to be part of it, to be honest. It sounds very intriguing. I'm one of those crazy people who likes to experiment new things. And this just, after talking to you, I'm very intrigued by what you're doing. And I really respect that despite a lot of pressure from the media and so much that is going on over here. Please continue. We need people who think outside of the box. That's pretty darn cool. So yeah, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It has been a great experience, and we covered some really solid ground in this podcast, I think. So thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who has been listening to this podcast. Once again, Shawn, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right.
thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a review if you liked it. You can check out our products at www.ketogeek.com and use our coupon code KGLAUNCH, all caps, for a $5 off of all our food products. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to join our community, we have a growing Facebook group as well. Till next time.